on, they're just key value pairs that Splunk extracts when searching data. So when you dispatch a search, Splunk is trying to identify different delimiters like an equal sign or a colon and assign the value on the left as the field and the value on the right as the value. It's going to then take these key value pairs and list them over here under interesting fields if that field is at least like 20% of the search range by default. So you can pop open any of these fields at the bottom and select any other fields that you would like to be included here if you so chose, and they would become selected fields as well. All right, so when we do click on 19 more fields here over on the left at the bottom, we get a pop-up with the additional fields. We can filter on these values by typing in the box at the top of the screen. So if I were looking for signatures, which I'm doing because I'm looking through Suricata data, I can just type in sig and click enter, and it's going to bring me down to this field for signatures here. And if I click the little box right next to signature, that is then going to make it a selected field so I can actually see it on my main screen without having to come into this section. So in this case, I've expanded the signature field here, and we can see a number of IDS signatures that look to probably be web application vulnerability signatures, thus proving that the source IP in the search, that 40 dot, is probably the one conducting the scan. So our answer for this question is going to be the 40.80.148.42. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there are a number of ways to conduct these searches. There isn't one right way to get the answer, but we do want to use other data sources to get that validation in our findings. So since I did mention we are going to be applying our answers today to the kill chain, you actually have a tab within each of these screens too, where you can expand the kill chain so you can see exactly what I'm seeing here on my screen, just to keep in mind where we are along the kill chain. So here we have in the reconnaissance phase, our IP address that is scanning our web server, which is that 40 dot. We'll also be creating an APT picture here just to see the interactions between systems as we go through. So here we have our source IP of 40 dot conducting this vulnerability scan to I'mNotReallyBatman.com. So that is our first question. Let me check the chat here because I see some questions. Okay. Yep, perfect. All right, thank you, folks, for answering those questions for me. Yeah, so as we walk through each of these pages within our scenario, it is actually walking you through each of these steps and searches. You don't actually have to come up with these on your own. So once you are in scenario 1, for example, and you've clicked on APT Prologue, if you scroll to the bottom, it says navigation, and you'll see next. And that is going to take us through each of the questions. So you'll see the different searches that I'm talking about here on the screen, and you can run them in your own tab. And you'll also see the answers and the results from these searches on those pages as well. There are 2 little tabs below the searches and results that say Lockheed Martin kill chain and threat picture. If you click on those check boxes, that'll bring up what I am showing you on my slide right now. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom at navigation, you can see where you'll click next to take us to our next question. Hopefully that helps with navigation here a little bit. Okay, so moving on to our second question. Now we want to identify the web vulnerability scanner. When we're investigating security events, it's really important to remember that some results of questions that we're answering are probably going to lead us to additional questions, right? I mean, we see the source IP, and now we want to know what company is actually running this web vulnerability scanner. So some of our searches may build upon each other as well. And outputs from previous questions can give us some hints about what we're looking for. So the second question that we want to answer, and if you go to the bottom of your page and navigate to identifying the web vulnerability scanner, that'll bring you to the searches and the results to help answer this question. We want to know what company created the web vulnerability scanner used by Poison Ivy. A couple of hints: you can use the source that we found in the prior question as the source of our scans. We're using the source type of stream again to give some insight into those communications between our web browser and our server. User agent strings are going to be important in providing some value here. And if you ever don't know what a term is, you can simply Google it. That is the best source of open source that you could use. So I'll give you 2 minutes to work through this page, and then we'll come back and walk through it. So we'll do 41 after the hour. All right, so let's walk through some of the searches and results for this question. So since we know from answering the previous question that web vulnerability scans originated from that particular source, the 40 dot, we're actually going to start with searching for traffic from that IP, and we're going to examine the source underscore headers for clues related to the tool that may be used for this scan. So you can see we're on the same index, which we will be this whole time. We've put in the 40 dot as our source, and then our source type of stream. And we just simply clicked on the source underscore headers field to populate what you can see here on my slide. If we zoom in on those source headers, we can see some information that says Acunetics Web Vulnerability Scanner Free Edition. So we can take this a step further and look in some other fields of our HTTP wire data. So if we look at the field of HTTP underscore user underscore agent, we can see some unusual agent strings in here. And in a few of them, we can again see Acunetics. But if I had no idea anything about web application vulnerability scanners, if I didn't even know what Acunetics was, then I would probably want to go ahead and Google that as well. And if you don't know what something is, always feel free to do that. Open source is a very powerful tool, regardless of what you're using. So I realize this sounds very simple and obvious, but it's really not the go-to for a lot of folks. So as you can see here from my Google search, Acunetics is in fact a web vulnerability scanner. So we can confirm our earlier findings. So we have confirmed that our 40 dot is using Acunetics to scan our domain. So we just want to add that as well to our kill chain here, the web vulnerability scanner of Acunetics. And we will also place that in our APT picture too. All right, don't see any other questions in the chat. So hopefully everyone is following along and able to see those searches and the results and see how we got here. Please let me know if you're having any issues. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and navigate to the next question, which is determining which web server is the target. So this question is similar to the previous question in the sense that we're trying to get our bearings, figure out the systems that are operating within this environment. So now we want to know what's running on our website anyway, because maybe I don't know how our production applications are built. So once we understand the underlying technology, we can also understand the vulnerabilities that would exist on that system to see what an attacker is even scanning for. And then hopefully we can eradicate that threat and patch to prevent these vulnerabilities from being exploited in the future. So what I want to know now is, what content management system is I'mNotReallyBatman.com using? What vulnerabilities could even be present on that? A couple of hints. If you don't know what a content management system is, that is a-okay. Go ahead and Google that as well. Source types that are relevant to web communication are going to be helpful, so keep that in mind. And URIs are going to contain information that will lead you in the right direction here. So we'll take another 2 minutes to walk through this, and we'll come back and go through the searches and results. 46 after the hour. All right, so as I mentioned, if you don't know what a CMS system is, that's totally fine. I know as a security analyst, I certainly don't know that much about web servers, so I want to go ahead and just Google that. So when I type in what is a web CMS system here, I can see that, okay, this is what's actually letting us control and manage the content on my website. So now that we know a little bit more about CMS, we can figure out the kind of logs that we need to dig deeper into this question. And we should also identify the IP address of our victim system, our I'mNotReallyBatman.com. So based on some of what we've discovered in our first couple of questions, we do have a decent idea of some of the logs to look at, as well as the IP address of our system in question. So we're going to be using our source type of stream again, our source address of 40 dot to determine where all of those scans were even directed to. So we simply just run a search that we ran previously with that source IP, and we're just looking at the destination IPs here. So we see that about 99% of the traffic is going to this 250.70 IP address. So that's probably a pretty good indicator that that's the IP of I'mNotReallyBatman.com. So now that we know the source type and we know the IP of our web server, we can start looking at the URLs or the URIs to get an idea of what kind of files and directory structures are actually being requested. So here I have my destination IP, and I'm still looking at the stream data, and I just want to expand the URI fields to see some of those directory trees. So I see a lot of Joomla here, and if I didn't know what that was, I would go ahead and just dig into that a little bit. So I can search, of course, for Joomla. I can also look at my previous search for CMS, and I can actually see here what Joomla is, and sure enough, it is a CMS. So it sounds like we're probably on the right path. So let's take our original search to find our URIs, and we're going to improve it a little bit. What we're going to do here is just add a status of 200 to our search to indicate successful page loads. We're also just going to add a transformational search command that we use here at Splunk called stats, and that allows us to count the number of events grouped by URI. We're going to be using stats throughout this workshop in a number of ways. And in fact, we've actually used it in a couple of our previous searches when we're looking at the counts of fields that we're inspecting. I'm also going to throw in another transformational command here at the end called sort, which is going to return our results in descending order based upon the count, so that when we get our results, they're formatted in a manner that we would like to see, that are going to be more helpful in answering our question. Again, if you're not familiar with these commands, that's okay. That's why we walk through them like this. And I have plenty of resources I could shoot you after this just to explain some of the commands a little bit more. So when I do that, when I run this search, as you can see here at the top of my slide, these are the results that I get. And we can see that a vast majority of the URIs on the server start with Joomla. Once again, I don't want to just take that at face value. I do want to get some confirmation and validation of these results. So we're going to use IIS logs to validate this a little bit more. So those are Windows server logs, and those are probably going to help us answer this question in that way too. So you'll see in this search, we have our source type as IIS instead of stream, so that we can validate those results we got previously. We still have our status of 200, and we have another stats count on there to situate them by URI. So with these results, again, we can see a lot of Joomla. So now that we've come in from both of those different perspectives, I think we can confidently confirm that I'mNotReallyBatman.com is in fact using Joomla. So what content management system is our domain using? Joomla. And we're going to also throw that into our kill chain here in our recon section. And we can also apply it to our APT picture under our I'mNotReallyBatman.com web server. All right, so you're going to want to scroll to the bottom again and click on next, identifying where a brute force attack originated to move us into our next question here. At this point, we are no longer in the recon phase of our kill chain. We're actually going to move into the exploitation phase, because the adversary is now attempting to exploit our system to gain access. And in a targeted malware attack, this exploitation could be done via a piece of malware that contains a 0-day or a number of different ways. But in this example, what it looks like to us is that this Poison Ivy APT group seems to be hammering away with login attempts. So the next question we want to answer is, what IP address is likely attempting a brute force password attack against I'mNotReallyBatman.com? So we're going to be using a source type that can see web browser to server communication. Knowing the destination IP address of the web server being attacked would be good, which of course we have. The web method is going to be really helpful to focus here. So think about gets and posts. And then the field form_data is actually going to have usernames and passwords in it if you look closely at those fields. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to run through this page, and we will reconvene at 54 after the hour. All right, so our first search here, we are back to our source type of stream. We're looking at HTTP traffic. We're just starting with a really broad search of the index and our source type so that we can pivot into the source of the traffic to see if there are a specific number of source IPs that are associated with these events. And because we know what the IP address of I'mNotReallyBatman.com is, we can see that here in our top 10 values list. So we're going to add that to our search with the destination equals 192.168.250.70. And we're going to pivot again to the source IP addresses. And when we do that, we're left with 3 of interest. 2 are external, and 1 should look familiar to us, that same 40 dot that we saw at the beginning. And if we look into the HTTP_method fields here, those are the HTTP method of the request, we can see nearly twice as many post requests as get requests. So since we are talking about a brute force password attack of a website, you can throw it in the chat. What do you think the most likely HTTP method for a brute force attack is? You think it's a get or a post? Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Yep, absolutely. So we do also want to throw in that HTTP_method of post then to our search. So now we can see the 2 source IP addresses with the vast majority of traffic coming in, and it looks like it's that 40 dot. So quick question here. Who thinks we have enough information to actually answer this question? Who thinks it's the 40 dot and who thinks it is the 23 dot? Little bit of a trick question here for you. Any takers, any guesses? Okay. All right. You cannot be tricked, Maya. Okay. So in our hints from earlier, I mentioned the form_data field, and that contains information being passed from the client browser to the web server. So if we narrow down our results a little bit more, you can see in the search here, I have the form_data field added with a wildcard username and password. So we're actually searching to look for values that contain the strings of username and password. This could be a very expensive search if we did it, on a full production environment or something. But since we're looking into a very specific index, it's going to narrow the amount of data that we're actually searching. So we've added that, and we can see in a couple of our results, the form data, we can actually see these usernames and passwords that are being attempted here. We've also thrown in a table command here at the end, which is going to take a result set and place specific fields into a tabular view, just so it's a little bit easier for us to read. And it's also going to take away all of the other values from the result set so we can focus on exactly what we're looking for. So when we've done that, these are the results that you get. And it's important to note that some form_data has the password near the front of the string and others have it farther back in the string. So if you were just looking through this initially and you didn't see what you were looking for, you may have to scroll over to see some of those. So now that we know form_data is the field that we want to look for these brute force login attempts, and that we want the string of wildcard username, wildcard password, we can use the stats command to count all of the source addresses that are running those types of post requests with that type of data in the form_data to provide us these results. And when we throw in that stats command to count by source address, we can actually see that, like Maya said, the source address of 23 dot is actually seen 411 times. So that is likely where the brute force attack is originating from. So again, like I mentioned at the beginning, when you're investigating these security events, you want to try to disprove yourself. You want to look for different types, look through different types of data and look for multiple potential answers here. So what IP address is likely attempting a brute force password attack? It's going to be the 23.IP address. And like I mentioned, we are in the exploitation phase of the kill chain now. So we will put that brute force attack originated under exploitation. And we are going to add it to our threat picture here as well. So we have the IP address and that host that is performing the attack. So that is over on the left. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is worth noting that the kill chain, while it is very useful for contextualizing intrusion, it's really not a one size fits all. So in this case, a brute force attack doesn't really fit perfectly neatly into this because the gateway into the system itself is really just due to poor security practices and not an actual exploit delivered to the organization. I mentioned MITRE ATT&CK earlier, so that is another framework that does a really great job of mapping data as well. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so moving on to our next question here. If you navigate to the bottom of your screen for the navigation section and you click on identifying the first password attempted in the attack, our next question is, what was the first brute force password used? So we know from our prior search that a string with wildcards between the values of username and password will return that user password combination. And if you also recall, we used the table command to provide us a nice result set of that data. So we're going to be using the same source type. Remember to look in the form_data field. The _time field is actually going to show you when the event occurred. And we're going to be building on the search from the previous question. So we will walk through this at 02 after the hour. All right, so our first search, we are looking at our stream source type with our same form data search. And we also want to throw in that table command there to look at the time and the form data. So what this is saying is by time, which user and password strings were attempted. Oh, 1 second. Yeah, absolutely. Same, Maya. Hey, Melissa, did you pre-register? Okay, yeah, so you had to pre-register to get the instances because I only had a certain number of instances allotted and it was based upon the number of attendees. So if you didn't pre-register, unfortunately, I can't give you access, but I can certainly provide the slides after. Okay, so that is what our first search is doing here. So we also want to throw in the reverse command here. So what it's doing is taking the output of our result set and flipping the order of the results. So now our oldest results are now on top. So this is giving us our form_data for the first brute force password attempt, and we can look within it to find that password string. So while that did give us an answer, it didn't really give us a scalable and repeatable way to get that answer. So you might say, so what? We found the password, we got our answer. But if you wanted to be able, excuse me, to repeat that and not have to perform these searches every time, we can actually just extract usernames and passwords and create a field for it so that Splunk will automatically pull these results out of your data. So what we've done here is thrown in our rex command. And what that's doing is providing a way to do an extraction of the password that's going to create a completely new field with these password strings. So we can actually just search through the field of password to look for these in the future. So that's what we've done with this rex command here, looking for the field form data and that password string within there to actually break out the passwords in this tabular format here that you see on my screen. So we have our password. So, okay, Our next question, we want to identify the password that was actually used to gain access. So we saw a lot of different logins, but we want to actually see which password was the one that worked. Excuse me. So what we're looking for now is what was the correct password for admin access to our content management system that's running on I'mNotReallyBatman.com. And as a bonus question, from what IP address was this password actually used? So we're going to be looking at that stream data again. We're going to be using our stats command to identify the correct password. And of course, we're going to be using that rex field command that I just mentioned to extract our password from the form_data field. So I'll give you a couple minutes to walk through this, and we will walk through it at 07 after the hour. Okay, so for our search, we have added, of course, that rex field. We have a stats count by password, and we've just sorted them in reverse order. So it's a good idea to be precise. So we just want to make sure we're focusing specifically on our web server in question, which is why the destination IP is in our search as well. And with our password extraction provided, we can pretty easily pull together an initial answer to this question. So we can see the user password values that are used more than once. And it would stand to reason that if we are brute forcing a website, we're going to run through a password list, right? But we're only going to retry a password that we get a positive hit on. So when we sort this by count, we can see that there's only one password that was used here more than once, and it is the password of Batman. So we can deduce that this is probably the password for that admin account that actually worked. Now, there are a couple of additional pieces of information that we need for our investigation, including where did that login actually come from? And if you remember, we did see a tremendous amount of traffic from a single IP address, but that wasn't the only IP address that we saw. So what we've done here is added a values function to our stats command. And we can see that the brute force attack came from the 23 dot, but it looks like the actual login attempt with the correct password came from the 40 dot. And this is just good information to add to our notes as well, because we did see some other activity from that 40 dot previously. IP address, whatever they something. Yep, absolutely. That's correct, Maya. All right, so the next logical step would be to get an idea of the time and the URI that was associated with our actual login. So to do that, we've just added that source IP of the 40 dot, which we just found, to our search so we can actually break out the URI here. So we know that the admin password was brute force, but we want to know the avenue into the server and what time this occurred. So if I add the IP address of the successful login event, add a table command to that to include the time, the URI, and the password, I can actually isolate these specific attributes and can add this information to our report just for future purposes and more situational awareness. So we can see here, the URI was this Joomla administrator index.php utilizing that password of Batman. So I'll go ahead and add that to our exploitation phase of the kill chain here. And I will also add it here to our APT picture. So if you scroll down and you navigate now to determining the elapsed time between events. So understanding when there was a common value or values between multiple events, and the duration between these events can be important as we investigate. So we understand when they tried, when it was successful, how much time was actually left between the two. And so luckily we do have our search for our password extraction, and we can build off of those previous searches, but we do want to bring time into our searches now. So the question here is, how many seconds elapsed between the time the brute force password scan identified the correct password and the actual compromised login? So we're still using that rex command to extract passwords, and we're going to identify the password that was used multiple times. And we want to look at the transaction command. So you'll see those in your searches that are being run here. So we'll take a couple of minutes to work through this page, and we'll talk about it at 12 after the hour. Actually, I'll go ahead and give you until 13 because I talked past that minute. 13 after the hour. Okay, so we know the password of interest is Batman because we saw it being used twice, once during the scan and again from a different IP address to log in. So based on that, we want to look for the delta or the difference in time between these Batman login events. So we're going to visualize this using our table command and grabbing the underscore time field and the source field. And we're actually going to use a command in here that's going to help us calculate the exact number of seconds between these two events. So we have our rex command. We're searching for that specific password, and we have it in a table format here with our time, our user password, and source. I mentioned the transaction command. So I want to break this down a little bit. So this gives us an easy way to group events together based on one or more fields. And it's going to return a field called duration. And that calculates the difference between the first and last event in a transaction. Now, a transaction is defined by the common value or values specified. So if we wanted to calculate the length of the vulnerability scan, we could do that as well using the source address. But if we put the source address field into this search with the user password, what it's going to give us is two different transactions because the login did come from two different source addresses. Remember the 40.trident and the 23.trident. So instead, we're going to group these values with the user password value instead. So just to explain this search a little bit more. And if I want to provide a rounded answer, I could use the eval and the round function to do this, but that would pretty much be valuable if I were using like a dashboard panel or something like that too. So what I can see here with our transaction command and our table duration command, I do get 92-ish seconds that occurred between the time of the login attempt and the successful login. This is definitely not the only way to answer this question. You could use a combination of different commands for this too, but transaction and duration provide a really simple and clean way to calculate this answer. I did get a question of what makes the time frame important to report. And yeah, so it certainly can be, an idea of actually what's going on from that vulnerability scanner, from those source IPs, but also the length of time between events that we may have as defenders to actually, defend against some of these types of attacks. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so our next question that we want to answer here is, what is the name of the executable that was uploaded by Poison Ivy, and what is the source address of the executable? So if you scroll to the bottom of your screen and in your navigation section, you click on identifying the executable uploaded. That is where you will see this screen. So a couple of hints. If we're looking for executables uploaded, think about the types of data, the source types that would have visibility into files in motion. And if a file is being uploaded, what is likely to be the HTTP method here? So we'll take a couple of minutes to work through this, and we will talk about this at 18 after the hour. All right, so we are going to be using our stream HTTP data, of course. We know that the destination is the web server, and we know its IP address. So what we want to do is add the string wildcard.exe to our search. This probably wouldn't be a great idea in a normal production environment because there's going to be a lot of executable files. But since we are narrowed down to our specific index, and for the purposes of this workshop, it's okay for us to do that. So we're running that search, and then we want to look into the part_file name field. And we can see two file names that are actually referenced. We have an exe and a PHP file. So while we don't yet know the field name, luckily with our search capabilities in here today, we can find the file extension regardless of what field it's in. So that's why we're able to see both of those results. So we are also going to search for our exe from a different perspective. Instead of using stream data, we actually want to try it now with our Suricata data. So I've put in source type of Suricata with our same destination IP and that .exe field name. So the additional field that we're looking for in Suricata, and if you didn't know this, you could simply look up the fields within Suricata data, but I have it here for you today. So we're looking for file info.filename. And that's going to be similar to the field we just looked at in the stream HTTP data. And in this case, I can see two exe files. One has the same name that we saw in our stream data, and the other looks like something we would often see on an IIS web server. If you didn't know that, that's okay though too. You could have just Googled that value and you would have seen that. So we did have to change up, in case you may have noticed this, our search a little bit with Suricata. We searched destination_IP and not destination. So this is going to come into play also if you're using different security tools as well, if you're not using Splunk. In any type of data that you're looking through, you just want to make sure that you know the way that the field names are represented. Excuse me. Because in different data types, they do have different, it'll say dest or destination_IP. So just make sure you are aware of that. And we have added the dest equals or destination_IP equals with our destination address there. So we could catch both instances of that. Again, this is not Splunk specific. This is going to happen in any type of security tooling that you're using, but just something worth mentioning here in case you notice that in the search. So we do want to broaden our search here to include the host name of the server and the IP address. And we're going to get results from both in our same search, and we can see those associated file names as well. So we have our Suricata source type with our destination domain or our destination IP with the HTTP method of post and the .exe file. And if I click on the dest field and our value of I'm not really Batman.com, I can see in our file info file name, I have those same two .exe files. So since I did throw in the HTTP method of post, that's going to narrow down this data to these three events. So again, we can see one of these is probably associated with normal IIS activity, and we still have our 3791.exe that we saw before. So because the question originally asked, though, about the executable uploaded by Poison Ivy, we probably want to check the source IP as well, just to verify. So we're actually going to pivot on that file name specifically. You can see here I've added it to the search. So we have our file info file name 3791.exe to see the source address of the exe. And if we click on the source field over on the left, I'll see my source of 40.80.148.42. This address, of course, has been associated with other stages of this attack, so that helps drive our confidence that this is probably our file of interest. So it's going to be the 3791.exe, and the source is going to be that 40.ip. So we're just adding that to our kill chain here for installation phase, because that is the actual executable that was uploaded and installed on our web server. And I've simply just added it here to my APT picture as well, coming from the 40.ip address. Now, unfortunately, I am almost out of time. Sorry for those technical difficulties there at the beginning. I did mention you will have access to these instances until the 16th. I will also include these slides in the conference session resources Slack channel. So you can continue to walk through the rest of this APT scenario on your own. There is also another ransomware scenario in your instance too, if you want to walk through investigating that. And that's also going to walk you through different questions that you want to be asking, different ways of pivoting around on that data and that kind of thing. So do I have any other questions from anyone right now over anything we went over today? Otherwise, I will put all of these resources in the Slack channel, and you can absolutely reach out to me via email. I'll also put my LinkedIn in there in case you have any questions that way, and you can certainly DM me here in this platform too. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks for that. Awesome. Yeah, great, guys. Well, enjoy the rest of the, I have another question, sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. So you would want to, no, that's okay. That's totally fine. So absolutely, that is a fantastic question. So it depends on which tool you're using. So in Splunk, I mentioned that we break up data in repositories called indexes. And so you could see in all of our searches, we had index equals bots v1. That was narrowing it down to that specific type of data. That's going to be specific to your tool. So whatever tool you're using, however it puts the data in repositories. You're going to want to narrow it down that way. And then absolutely, time frame is going to be the other big thing. So once you start investigating and you're kind of getting a feel for when these events occurred, you can narrow down. I always like to kind of cast a wide net, not too wide. You don't want to like break your system or anything, but cast a wide net and then start to narrow down based on the results of some of the questions that you're answering. Does that help answer that? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this. I will post those resources here shortly. And thanks again.